did I suppose what you could call an exegetical lesson on this chapter here. Particular reason for the chapter, as opposed to any of the other chapters of Proverbs, this is one of these ones that we had talked about a few weeks ago, and we were looking at the animals, and I just thought that it was interesting with everything in its context given to us by a man that we know little to nothing about, somebody named Agur. This is one of these chapters here where this is not, or at least doesn't appear to be, Solomon. It appears to be written by somebody else. We have this individual, like I said, that is completely unknown to us, save for this passage here. The words of Agur, the son of Jakeh, the oracle. We can kind of guess, who this might be, but at the end of the day, it would just be speculation. It's very, very similar to what we find in the next chapter, in Proverbs chapter 31. We have an individual named King Lemuel. Words of wisdom that was taught to him by his mother. We have the words of King Lemuel, the oracle, which his mother taught to him, and it starts off in verse 2. What, O my son, and what, O my son of my womb, and what, O my son of my bowels. And again, Solomon, being as wise as he was, there were other people who were indeed wise and had some wisdom to impart unto us, serving as oracles of God. Proverbs chapter 30. I hope that maybe a study, like an exegetical study like this, will be a good preparation in our minds for a class on the book of Proverbs. I certainly look forward to doing something like that. And thinking about these words given to us by Solomon, King Lemuel. There are some biblical scholars that would say, well, King Lemuel, that this served as a stand-in for King Samuel. Lemuel, the name Lemuel, of course, means belongs to God, and whether or not there was indeed a King Lemuel, or this was King Solomon, or this Lemuel it was a stand-in for King Solomon. Of course, all of that would be up to speculation as well. But I think these things are interesting. It's interesting to stop and take a look and see, who was it that wrote these words? Some of these individuals we had never heard of before. And here it is now the things that they have to impart, the wisdom that they have to impart was given to us in the words of God, to instruct us, to teach us, to tell us how it is that we are to improve our life. And I think that this individual Agur from Proverbs 30 has a lot to give us, to tell us how it is that we ought to improve our life. So once we get into it, was there any passage from Proverbs 30 that really stood out to you? And anyone that you liked in particular? Go ahead.
Well, it wasn't so much as me liking it. It's just that I had not thought of the scriptures 18 and 19 as you presented. I always thought that the three things are too wonderful for me was things that he fathomed, and he couldn't understand
in verse 19 to verse 20.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I saw that.
Yeah, the one that says that she eats and she wipes her mouth. That is she does a thing and she clears away all trace of that thing which she has done, and then she says, I have done no wrong.
And I took that as
Yeah.
he did a different thought. Like he goes through and he
Okay.
talks about this 18 and 19 are together. Then he goes on to something else. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I didn't take
Yeah.
it as that connected to 18 and 19 because if these are three things that's too wonderful,
Yeah.
an adulterous woman would not be a wonderful thing.
Well, wonderful. A lot of times we think of the term wonderful as in something that is great, something that is excellent. But wonderful is in the purest sense something that causes wonder. Something that we think about and we just can't tend to wrap our head around it. But yeah, and I'm glad that you're bringing this up because when we're thinking about the Word of God and we're contemplating it and meditating on it, that's what we should be saying. What is the meaning of this? What is the application of this? And it could have multifaceted applications as well too. Well, hopefully the lesson was interesting in that respect. Because I didn't never thought of it that way too.
I never thought of that.
All right. Any other thoughts concerning these passages here? Anything stood out to you as interesting or something maybe that you haven't considered or thought about anymore, Brother Juan?
I always think about this, verse 28, spider takes the grass with its hands, and it's in king's palaces. I go into my place that's completely sealed, and I always find this little spider, and how they get in here? In king's palaces.
Well, how about this? What do you think the application of that would be? That spiders, as small and as insignificant as they are, they always find a way to get into the good spots.
Yeah.
They have the wisdom to put themselves into the good places, right? Certainly as Christians, that's a good bit of wisdom for us. When it comes to the hard places, when it comes to the evil places, so many people are quick to run to those, and they get themselves into all kinds of trouble. As Christians, we ought to have the wisdom to put ourselves into good places, and when there's trouble afoot, don't put yourself into play, right? All right, so we've been talking about Agur. I want us for a moment. We're gonna take a look at some scriptures. Look at Proverbs 29. I want to take a look at some of these surrounding chapters here in Proverbs. Could I get somebody to please read verses 1 through 10 of Proverbs 29? Go ahead, Eric.
Whoever remains stiff-necked after many rebukes will suddenly be destroyed without remedy. When the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. A man who loves wisdom brings joy to his father, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth. By justice, a king gives a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. Those who flatter their neighbors are spreading nets for their feet. Evildoers are snared by their own sin, but the righteous shout for joy and are glad. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. Mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn away anger. If a wise person goes to court with a fool, the fool rages and scoffs, and there is no peace. The bloodthirsty hate a person of integrity and seek to kill the upright.
All right, so as we're going through these passages, if I can get somebody to read verses 10 through 20, please. As we're going through these verses, I want you to take note of how this is written some literary tools that's employed, and how this is going to be different, how the layout is different than what we see of Agur in Proverbs chapter 30. All right, Jack, chapter 29, verses 11 through 20.
A fool gives full vent to his spirits, but a wise man quietly holds it back. If a ruler listens to falsehood, all his officials will be wicked. The poor man and the oppressor meet together. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both. If a king faithfully judges the poor, his throne will be established forever. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. When the wicked increase, transgression increases, but the righteous will look upon their downfall. Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your hearts. Where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. But blessed is he who keeps the law. By mere words a servant is not disciplined, for though he understands, he will not respond. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him.
Could I get somebody to finish out that chapter for me, 21 through 27? Go ahead, William.
He who pampers his slave from childhood will in the end find him to be a son. An angry man stirs up strife, and a hot-tempered man abounds in transgression. A man's pride will bring him low, but a humble spirit will obtain honor. He who is a partner with a thief hates his own life. He hears the oath, but tells nothing. The fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted. Many seek the ruler's favor, but justice for man comes from the Lord. An unjust man is abominable to the righteous, and he who is upright in the way is abominable to the wicked.
All right, very good. Okay, so just scan over Proverbs chapter 29 just for a minute, and take a look at how this is laid out. And I want to make some contrasting remarks on how we can see Proverbs chapter 29 is different than Proverbs chapter 30. So let's take a look again at the surrounding chapters. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 31. This is the words of King Lemuel. Proverbs chapter 29 has traditionally been credited to King Solomon. Proverbs 30 to Agur, Proverbs 31 King Lemuel. Let's take a look at Proverbs 31. Could I get somebody to read verses 1 through 9, please? Go ahead, 1.
1 through what?
1 through 9.
The words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him. What, my son, and what, son of my womb, and what, son of my vows? Do not give your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroys kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert the justice of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to those who are bitter of heart. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. Open your mouth to the speechless, in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy.
Very good. Okay, so as we're getting into the rest of this chapter, this is one of the areas that I tend to forget, and again, putting this chapter all within its context, I think that this is very interesting concerning that of King Lemuel, that these are words that his mother had taught him. You know, an excellent wife who can find. Where are these words of wisdom coming from? His mom. Let me ask a question. Does your mother have words of wisdom? You know, through experience of life, words of wisdom to give to their son? I know some people might say, oh, you don't know my mother. But I'm talking about as a general rule, obviously. But we see things like verse 3, and it's like, do not give your strength to women or your ways to that which destroys king. And it's like, see the patriarchy here. Don't give your strength to women. Again, who's this coming from? From a mother to her son. Words of wisdom, instruction about life, instruction how somebody ought to live as someone who is wise, as someone who is a ruler. It's not for kings to drink wine or rulers to desire strong drink, for they will drink and forget what is decreed and pervert the rights of the afflicted. In verse 6, he says, give strong drink to him who's perishing, and wine to him whose life is bitter. Let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his troubles no more. Is this promoting the use of alcohol for those individuals that might be having a difficult time in their life?
No, because it's not going to solve anything.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. This is not a support for drinking alcohol. When you're down, this is a rebuke of it. You're exactly right. Give strong drink to him who's perishing, wine to him who's bitter. Let him drink and forget his poverty and his trouble, and his troubles will be no more. I mean, really, when you think of difficult times in your life, being afflicted, perishing, your life is problematic. You're in poverty. How about this? Does alcohol make any of that better? Does alcohol fix any of those problems? It makes it worse. Yeah, you'll forget about it. But in the meantime, while you're forgetting about it, it's just getting worse. Go ahead.
It might be, alcohol might be excusable for a dying person in great pain because it was used to deaden pain.
Mm-hmm. Now we're not talking about
dying person, but totally inexcusable for a national leader.
Absolutely.
Because it numbs and dulls the brain.
And of course, our current president, of course, is known as somebody who does not touch alcohol. He does not drink alcohol, and that's a smart thing. Could I get someone to read verses 10 through 20, please? 10 through 20. Go ahead, Jack.
An excellent wife who can find, she is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchants. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy.
I tell you, now that I've gotten to the point, I'm moving into the season of my life when my girls are thinking about boys, and I even have daughters that are getting of the age where they're preparing themselves to make a home for themselves and to create a family, to find somebody to marry. And I know, and those of you that have been through this, one of the biggest concerns as a parent that we have for our children is that they find a good person to marry. For those of us that have daughters, we want daughters that are gonna find a good man, and a good man that will respect God. Because if a man will not respect or show respect or shows contempt for the one that created him? What makes you think that he's going to show any sort of respect toward you? And of course, for our sons, we want our sons to marry women who are virtuous, who have these sort of characteristics and these sort of attributes in our life. We want this for our children because we want them to be successful in these areas. Could I get somebody to finish out this chapter here, starting at verse 21? Go ahead, Eric.
She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself, her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates, when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you would sell them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates.
All right. So, as we took a look at three of these proverbs here, Proverbs 29, 30, and 31, they're obviously different in the way that they're laid out. Have you noticed any sort of literary devices that are common between the three, or something that's different, something that stands out? How is it different toward you? What are some things that you notice that are different between the three?
Between what?
Between the three chapters, 29, 30, and 31. In particular, how they may be laid out. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so Proverbs 30, the one we studied this morning, is more, I don't know, paragraph type of, he deals with subject matter in kind of snapshots.
Yes.
Where,
Yeah.
so that's Agur, and then I guess it's Solomon in the next one that we did in 29. He leaves no gray area. It's either white or it's black, and each verse is a compare and contrast. Damned if you do, this is good, this is bad.
Right.
And then this last one in 31, with Lemuel, it's kind of building into a crescendo of, he starts with the basis and then kind of builds it up and up and up. So yeah, they're all different, but they're all wisdom. And
That's
I
right.
like how Agur treats his wisdom to begin with. He goes, this isn't my wisdom. I'm a devil. I just collected all this stuff. It's from God.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. When I take a look at chapter 29, I've heard this being described as something like parallelism. As you're going through each of these verses, you have these different activities, the way the wise live and the way the foolish live, and it's a huge contrast. You got a contrast between the wise and the foolish. In chapter 30, there's some other things that we see here. A lot of metaphor that's being used here in this chapter, using metaphorical language, of course, to portray a deeper meaning. Agur refers to the natural world. He takes a look at the natural world and creatures to illustrate human qualities in wisdom. A lot of imagery. A lot of imagery here is evoked to to make these concepts to us more understandable and more relatable. You know, how many of us can't or can rather relate to the things that Agur has seen in his life and has witnessed in his life. In particular, those things that are unbearable for us. You know, when we see the foolish do what they do, in chapter 30, at verse 22 or verse 21, under 3 things that the earth quakes, and under 4 it can't bear up. When a slave when he becomes king, and a fool when he's satisfied with food. Under an unloved woman when she gets a husband, and a maidservant when she supplants her mistress. When we see conceited people in this life, and the fools that they are, when they come across any amount of success, when anything changes in their life, how they treat that success so foolishly. You know, we see these things, and we see how they behave, and we say, how foolish is that? Chapter 31, that of King Lemuel. How is this different than the other 2 that we had read?
This lesson?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, it seems to me that it would be very hard for one woman to do everything that this woman is described doing here. And maybe this is an example of a lot of things for us to follow insofar as we can.
Right.
I-
Well, what is being done here is the character of a virtuous
Right.
woman. You know,
Right.
not that a virtuous woman does all of these things, but this is the sort of character that you'll see in that. What's that?
A perfect wife, a perfect in God's eyes,
Mhm.
as far as her worship of the Lord.
Sure. How different verse chapter 31 is from 30 and 29. What it seems to me that chapter 31 is laid out more in the. I mean, it seems to me laid out not so poetically. It's more in like a prose sort of fashion, like a conversation that a parent would have with their adult child, and teaching them, you know, the things that he ought to do, and things that he ought to look out for. That's the way chapter 31 is laid out to me. All right. Any other thoughts? I'm glad we had an opportunity to read a couple more Proverbs. And of course, chapter 30, as I had mentioned, I think that there is an overarching theme. What would you say? What would you say is the overarching theme as we studied Proverbs 30? Do you think there is a theme, or it's just kind of seemed to be all over the place to you? Go ahead, Will.
I think it speaks to the awareness of the writer.
The what?
The awareness of the writer. You know, you had kind of talked about
Mm-hmm.
the janitorial sense of this man, like, you know, or you spoken of a person lowly and in their position at a corporation, and he may have a position that allows his mind to be free while he works with his hands, and so he's able to observe what as he goes about, and these are the things that he's observed in his life,
Yeah.
and as he's written them down for us to see.
Now, what I said, I got to add that what I said was a bit of speculation on my part concerning Agur. We don't know. I talked about it in terms of the fact that we don't know anything about Agur. But during Ager's day, he might have been well known from among his people. We don't know because we don't have that detail given to us. And if it was important for us to have that detail, the Holy Spirit would have provided it for us. But what's important is the wisdom that is contained in what he says. But the point that I was trying to make is, just because we may not know a whole lot about an individual, sometimes, like I said, sometimes it may be a person of lowly position. Do not disregard a wisdom that this individual might have gained through life experience. And Will's right. Obviously, there are some things that Ager had some time to think about and to contemplate. What's the word I'm thinking of? To meditate. You ever spend any sort of time in your life just meditating and thinking about things and thinking about the day that you've had and the interactions that you had with people and see how you see how some people act and you say, well, that was pretty smart of that individual to do this or that. I ought to emulate that, or we'll look at the foolishness of somebody else and say how dumb, right? Go ahead, Meemaw.
Normally, or a lot of times, we think of women as being weak. The weak one of the two, the male or the female, and maybe just stay at home, just a homemaker. That's people who don't know what goes into being a homemaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet this 31 shows that woman can do anything that a man can do, and do it well.
And do it well. There are certain things that
As far as her
yeah.
character is concerned, she's strong.
That's right. That's right.
Extremely strong.
Just as a man can be of good character,
Right.
a woman can be of excellent character as well in all these areas. That's right. That's right.
Steve?
Go ahead, Eric.
So, this is a question I don't know. So we know that not all of these proverbs were written by Solomon. We do know that they're coming to us by the Holy Spirit, but are these collections of wisdom that Solomon collected?
I thought about that. I thought about that too. I don't know. Could be. Could be.
And that being the case, Ager might well have been a Gentile. Just a very wise man.
That's true. That's true. King Lemuel, of course, his name means belongs to God. What was he king of?
He had his own kingdom.
What was that kingdom?
And yet,
We can read about the kings. Of course, by the time Solomon became king, Israel had just started into its kingship. Of course, starting with Saul, and then moving on to David, and then his son Solomon. So we're three kings deep, right? Lemuel, what was he the king of? We don't have any record of that. But you're right. I actually thought about that. I wondered if this was a collection. This is of wise sayings that Solomon had gathered. Yeah. Go ahead, Meemaw.
Manasseh, weren't the two of them members of the kingdom of Massa in northern Arabia? What's northern Arabia today? I read that in a study.
Yeah, I don't know. But I just find it interesting. Here's a guy that we don't know anything about him, yet here his writings are. But he had given these things to us. But where did they originate? From his mother. Wise words of his mother.
And some of these words are repeated in Matthew, right? About watching the animals, the ants, and how they
That's right.
and gather, and
Yeah. You know, on that, looking at parallels, I want us to think about some New Testament parallels. One of the overarching themes that I found in Proverbs 30 was on the subject of humility. You know, how it is that we ought to watch ourselves against haughtiness, against conceit. You know, all of these things. So what's the lesson here? You know, be ye humble. Can you find any parallels? Any parallels between Ager's insights and Jesus's instruction concerning humility? Humility. Humility. Being humble. Any sort of parallels that you can think of? Let's look at these passages here that reminds a man to be humble. There's a kind of man who curses his father and does not bless his mother. There is a kind who is pure in his own eyes, yet is not washed from his filthiness. There is a kind, oh how lofty are his eyes, and his eyelids are raised in arrogance. There is a kind of a man whose teeth are like swords and his jaws like knives, to devour the afflicted from the earth and the needy from among men. Dropping down to verse 17, the eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother, the ravens of the valley will pluck it out, and the young eagles will eat it. Or that. Anybody have a different translation that says something other than eagles and ravens?
I got vultures.
Vultures, yeah. You know, when we're talking about being in the valley and having the birds pluck out body parts, you know, you got the blackbirds, the crows, and the vultures. What sort of imagery did you start thinking of? Think about
The occult or the devil.
okay. I think of the imagery that comes in my mind is a corpse laying out in the open.
And being
Yeah, being just an individual dead in the valley, and his body just left out there to the birds. Death. I mean that's the imagery that comes to my mind. And of course, you know, this may be talking about, you know, those that will not humble themselves are going to subject themselves to divine retribution. Any sort of parallels that we can think of concerning what Jesus would have to say about humility?
Mark 9 and 38.
Mark 9:38.
Now John answered him, saying, Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. But Jesus said, Do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me. For he who is not against us is on our side. For whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name, because you belong to Christ, assuredly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward.
Okay. All right.
I would like to ask you, what is your take on that?
Let me give some thought to that, and we can have a discussion about it. Unfortunately, I'm kind of running out of time. Let me chew on that.
Sure.
And I'll get back with you. I was thinking in particular in Matthew chapter 23 where Jesus said that whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And of course that the parallel can be found in Luke chapter 14 and verse 11. And also this teaching from Luke chapter 18. In Luke chapter 18 in particular, I really like this passage. You know, I was thinking about this in terms of verse 12 that says that there is a kind who is pure in his own eyes, yet is not washed from his filthiness. In Luke chapter 18 and verse 9, Jesus told this parable to some people who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and thus viewed others with contempt. And as I mentioned, that's the danger of the lack of humility, because it blinds us, or it distorts our view of ourselves, and also distorts the view that we ought to have of others. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and was praying this to himself: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, swindlers, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I pay tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. I tell you, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. Verse 12, there is a kind who is pure in his own eyes, yet is not washed of his filthiness. That's a parallel that I saw there concerning humility. All right, well, running out of time for tonight. I appreciate everybody's participation in the reading. Anything else before we close that really stood out